You're good.
Great, thank you. My name is Mike Remington with the City of Duval City Council. We're ready to start our City Council Committee of the Whole meeting for Tuesday, December 1st, 2020. It's now 5:30. First item we have is good of the order, which will be followed by the majority of our discussion this evening on the 2021-2022 biennial budget. We're coming up on a point in January or in December where we approve the budget, but we still have a ways to go with our discussions. So any of those listening in or joining us this evening, you'll be hearing mostly budget discussion during the next 90 minutes. Council, anything for the good of the order? Councilmember McHenry.
Yeah, I just wanted to say it got a little crazy with the holiday last week, and I still want to get around to getting those videos of, well, you guys saw whatever email I sent with your blurbs. So if you're around and you're able to, in the next day or two, have me come by. I won't get closer than 10 feet and I'll be wearing a mask. I can take that video for you. If you would rather shoot it yourself, you can just send it to me, but call me first because I had one extra little video clip that I was going to take. So
if we do our own, Amy, to make it easier on you, we would just use our phone. Does that work out okay?
Yeah, and whatever device you have that has the best quality of camera or video. So if you have a nice new iPhone or something like that, that would probably work the best. And then you can email it to me.
And the length of time for those again?
What do you mean?
Something you're shooting for, how long that should be? If
so
we send you a 2-hour video, is that too much?
No, so I sent, if you look in your email, I had sent an email, I don't remember when, it was last week or something, because I was thinking I was going to try and get it done before Thanksgiving and that didn't work out. So if you look back in your email, but I would be happy, I will just resend it and remind everyone too, because I know how it is after long meetings, we kind of forget everything we said. So I'll re-email everyone and try to nail down some times that I could either come by or you could send me a video. And in it is a blurb that you'll say. So each person has a part to say. And then once I get all the videos, I can add them all together and it'll be one cohesive message, just different people speaking.
Okay, perfect. I appreciate that.
It's not long. It's only like 2 sentences.
Other council members, good of the order? Not seeing any. Well, we will go ahead and move on to our biennial budget discussion. I think we've spent the last month and a half or so talking about different items. We've gone through about 77 items that had questions. Many of those got answered. We did add another series of questions that we hadn't talked about yet, and that was the SCADA or monitoring system for our utilities, which was about $350,000, and there were some questions about support for that system and training and other things that would go along with that. Director Laniszewski went through and answered a lot of those questions on our matrix, so we probably won't go through every item, but I'll try to loop back and make sure if people have questions. I think it's really helpful from time to time in this long process to stop and kind of assess where we stand. We've been doing a lot of review, had presentations from directors. That was followed by council discussion, again, with amongst ourselves and with directors and the mayor. Try to gain more understanding and discuss some of the changes that were possible in the or that we would recommend, council would recommend for the budget. The next part that we get into, of course, is decision making. And tonight I was hoping to just kind of take stock of where we're at. And one of the toughest parts for council is that decision part. As I mentioned last time, there really is a yes or no on a lot of things just to see where we're at. One of the things that I had asked staff to put together was a little side matrix that we could kind of go through and just assess where we're at as council in terms of the overall budget. Where do we stand with looking like approving it? and really narrow in on what items do we feel need to be added or changed or subtracted from the budget, so we could focus on those items and really start to center our conversation, whether that's some back and forth, some negotiations, if you will, and amongst council members on what we'd like to see in there. Two of the biggest issues that we've had, we do have several new positions. We've had questions asked about, is it too many for this time, especially with COVID-19? We've had input that, these positions, some of them were in our last budget. We just hadn't brought those forward. They've certainly been requested by staff to help meet the growing workload in our growing city. But there's always that question about, is this sustainable into the future? So those were some of the questions around the new positions. And another one was with CIP. Councilmember Langle took considerable time to review those. She's had fairly lengthy discussions with Director Leniszewski, and she's come up with a recommendation for a council to consider where CIP runs in a 3-tiered system. The first tier being top priority, which we would approve and fund. Tier 2, which we also find important to be able to move forward, but may need a little additional information on them. And tier 3 were items, again, that are important, but questions about whether or not we have the staff capacity to be able to truly manage and move those forward. So I'll let Councilmember Langle discuss that a little bit more as we move forward. But before we do, I hope you don't mind, I'd like to take a look and just see where we're at. And one of the simple questions is, and we've made several changes to the budget. Sometimes it's hard to keep track. But the simple question I'd like to ask each council member, including myself, is, do you support the budget as it stands right now? And that will be followed by, if you don't support it right now or feel like you could approve it today, then what is it we want to focus in on? And I think we have a good idea as a group what those items are. But this will help take stock, help us to focus, I hope. So with that, Dana, were you able to put together a matrix or that little sheet so we could take a look at it? See if that's something we could pull up. I didn't talk to council ahead of time, so some of you may think, boy, he's sure putting us on the spot, but I recognize that's our job as council to make those decisions, and finding out where we stand today, I think will be helpful. So the simple first question we had is just, are we in a position with the changes we've made so far to be able to approve the budget? And I'll just go through each council member to see if that's a yes or no for you. So the question again, are you prepared to adopt the budget as presented this evening? Councilmember Naplin.
My unmute is finicky. I apologize. I pressed
That's
the
okay.
space bar, click on it. I don't know what's going on. No, I'm not prepared. I know a lot of work has gone into this, and so it's no reflection of how much people have worked on this, but no.
That's okay. We're just looking for real straightforward input to take stock of where we're at. And I think that's reasonable for where we're at this point. Councilmember Langle.
No.
Councilmember Remington. Oh, that's me. I'll say no at this point as well. Councilmember Hope.
No.
Councilmember Brunicki.
Just for clarification, does the budget as it stands right now, meaning with the positions in Public Works?
It does. It includes all the positions minus the contract policy analyst, which we decided to put on hold.
Okay, yes.
So that's a yes. And Councilmember McHenry.
No.
So our next piece of this is just simply to go through and try to pinpoint what are the key things for each council member that we really need to focus on. I know that there's still a lot on our list to talk about, but we really want to focus in on the things that really require our attention. And again, as an example, we had talked about new positions and CIP being a couple of those items that we need to do further work on. So I'll go right through again.
You calling on me? You're putting me on the spot a little bit. I wrote a few things down, and hopefully I will have remembered everything. But I think the FTEs I'm not quite comfortable with. Census FlexNet, not quite 100% on that. Using entirely REIT funding for building maintenance, like large building maintenance projects, and then just not having any ongoing set aside for building maintenance.
So that's, there's some money set aside, as I recall, Jennifer, but it's just the basics. It's not doing painting or new carpeting. So you're referring there to having additional monies to help do upgrades to our facilities?
Yeah, kind of like how we do, you know, our vehicle fund. We don't just send money in there to change the oil. We set aside money because we know we're going to have to replace them. So, I mean, we know roofs are going to be replaced at some point, painting. We know things will need to be done. So
well, that's very specific and very helpful. Councilmember Lingle.
Well, the capital budget, which includes a number of things, I don't have to really go through all of the specifics. I think the new positions warrant more discussion to try to find some common ground, I guess. And then the other thing, I do agree with Councilmember Naplin that we need to better provide for maintenance. It would be considered ordinary maintenance covered by a replacement reserve for our facilities. And I have some specific things I'd like to see added into the budget to deal with things that were not on the capital list.
Okay, so for our citizens that might listen, we do have money set aside in the budget for specific capital projects related to facilities, but those are larger items over $5,000, as I recall, include HVAC, and one of them includes a rather large remodel of our utilities building. But this would be additional monies to help do things like siding, carpet, and so on. Thank you. For myself, I do think there's further discussion we could use on FTEs, and I understand the issues with CIP, and I think we can go through and help identify which ones we feel that we can really support and which ones take further discussion. Councilmember Hogue.
I actually, the biggest thing that I'm focusing on right now is the FTEs. And I don't know if you have another question for us down the road on what solutions that we would have for that. But
I think we can get into that. That's part of what, you know, I don't consider really that we negotiate with each other. We just have a good discussion and try to come up with some consensus. We don't always all agree. So I don't see it as a negotiation, but I think it's really time for council to sit down and say, what do we want to see in there? And have that focusing in. So I think the simple answer is yes. I think we'll have that opportunity here, hopefully this evening, on especially with FTEs and possibly with CIP as well.
I still would like to see a bigger picture around FTEs, which would mean going back 5 years, going ahead 5 years, and trying to figure out where we've been, where we're going with salaries and benefits all around. That might help us with our process of deciding about these new FTEs.
Thank you. Councilmember Branicki.
Yes, so I said yes because it was many months ago where we did a workshop, I believe, and Public Works made a presentation in regards to the FTEs. And so at that point, I clearly understood what the need was. And having been around for over a decade and watching our park system grow to the level that it is today, and also our utilities expanding due to the growth in the community. I think for sure, when you consider the investment in the parks, because I do recall a time when we barely took care of those parks. We're up at Big Rock, and now we've made a really large investment. So I really believe that through the presentation that I observed and took notes on, that it really is time to have that position there so that we can make sure our investment is being taken care of to the full degree. Plus, we have more parks coming online. And then, you know, I just have a philosophy about when you have to take care of your city, utilities are, to me, that's something I've always told my constituents that's a priority. And if that's not being taken care of to the degree it needs to be, then I don't know where else I would want to be putting money towards. So that seems to be a priority. I just want to put in a fact that over the many years, I've watched the staff, I worked with them, and I've always been very impressed that when we went through some hard times and difficult times, and we had still kept our reserves, everyone knew how to notch that belt a little smaller. And, you know, this staff has been remarkable in what they've done over the years to just basically squeeze water out of a rock. So I have full trust in what they proposed. And the other part of it is if I feel that there is something that's off or the numbers don't look good after second, third, fourth quarter, the budget can be amended. The council has the full ability to always go back, check, you know, and take care of those issues. And it's not unusual, a 1 year, 2 year, to go back, make those amendments to address those issues. So I'm a yes for those reasons.
Great. Thank you. Councilmember McHenry.
I think everyone's brought up really great points and areas. I think for me, it's more of a larger view of the whole budget, and we still have a lot of questions, items, or issues that we had on our list that we want to discuss. So for me, I would just like to finish working through those before I can feel totally comfortable, feel like we've gone through all of the motions, had all the discussions, made any changes we need to. So for me, it's kind of everything we still have on our list. I just want to get through it.
Good. Well, thank you. Again, for our citizens, we're so many items in a large city budget. And so we've identified some of those key items. I'd like to focus, if we can, on the FTEs. Dana, I might need your help. I want to make sure that I have all of things. I thought I was missing something. We have a FTE, which is a maintenance one for water. We have a FTE maintenance one for parks and sewer. We have a FTE for admin support. We have a contract city administrator the first year, and that would turn into a full-time city administrator the second year, which would be a employee, not a contract. And then finally, we had the contract policy analyst, which was for $80,000 to help us analyze our policies and code, make sure that we're up to date. And last meeting, we agreed as a group to put that on hold for now. The mayor had offered that up, especially if it would help support getting these other positions. Did I miss one, Dana? I thought, are we good with finance? I thought we had one more. Mayor, am I missing something?
We had an admin in City Hall, and that's to support the clerk. But to be clear, and just a reminder, when I was offering up the policy analyst, the reason was that those FTEs that are requested in the budget are so critical. I'm willing to give up something that's very important to the city's long-term well-being to make sure we get core utility and park work done. So if we don't get those FTEs, I will be working to try and get that back in the budget.
Good. Thank you. Council, so we've all, or pretty much all, have identified some concerns or changes we might want to see with FTEs. And several have mentioned additional information. We've received quite a bit of information, but there's still questions out there. I believe everyone, Councilmember Naplin, I think everyone saw your questions. Steve sent those back to everybody. Is that correct? Did you still have questions after his feedback? What are the key questions?
Well, Steve and I were still corresponding actually about a follow-up question, so not completely, but it was really nice of him to answer my questions. I did have quite a few. So I think for me, we are investing quite a bit of money on the sewer plan and the comp plan. And within that, there's a significant analysis of, the sustainability, the rate structure, what kind of upcoming capital projects that we need to, have enough funds for. And I think that would really provide the information we need to feel confident moving forward on these positions. And it just seems really backwards to me to spend all of that money on these comp plans and make a really big decision of expanding staff when we haven't done that yet or received it. It just seems a little bit backwards to me. And so for me, I'd really like to see the full report before we hire for those positions. That's just my comfort level. And I think it feels like it's going to be tight. I don't see a lot of revenue left over in the water fund in particular. And ratepayers are supposed to pay to maintain the system, not just day-to-day operations. And I don't see a lot of buffer in there at all once you add on another FTE. And so, yeah, it's just a concern I have. I'd really like to see the full report. We've gotten a snippet of it, but I just don't understand what has changed today or tomorrow versus 2 weeks ago that we can't, wait for that report just a couple months.
Did you have any concern? Again, I'm just trying to narrow this down. Did you have any concern with the other positions for the admin support for the clerk at City Hall or the contract city administrator turning into a full-time city administrator in 2022?
I think those positions are necessary. The admin doesn't start until 2022. So if for some reason we can't afford it, there'd be a mid-buy and we could review it before it gets hired. I think the ones I'm the most nervous about are the ones that will be all three hired right at once to,
Yeah.
Those are the ones I'm the most nervous about. I don't want to have to lay anyone off. Not that I would do it, but I don't want to ever be in a situation where we get ahead of ourselves and have to take something back. That would not feel good.
Thank you. I appreciate the specific feedback. Councilmember Langle, of the positions that I brought up, are there some that you still have questions on? Are there others that you said, I support those and we could move forward on?
To get them out of the way, I already spoke my support for the admin one, and the city administrator positions are past due. And on the three positions related to utilities and parks, what I've been thinking about was council members Naplin's suggestion at the last meeting, which was that the positions be phased in. And one notion, since there's other issues in public works from my perspective, is that if you did do one hire, which was council members' original thought, and we'll keep getting revenue numbers in. Hopefully people are shopping heavily through Amazon this Christmas. To the point where when you feel like you've got more information, you can continue to hire a second position. Our director of public works did clarify that on the parks position, we, those parks haven't come online yet. Sounds like they'll start to come online in 2021, and there'll be a year's opportunity for, I'm sure Steve will correct me if I'm wrong. There'll be usually they maintain the park for 1 year. So there again, we have a little breathing room, and given all the information that we need to continue to hire if everything shakes out in a way that's more comfortable. So I think we have a bit of a path forward that Councilmember Naplin originally envisioned. Maybe that proposal is no longer where she's at. And I guess we would hear back from her on that. But, you know, starting with one, keeping the conversation going, and this also relates to the CIP, and we really need to have a substantive discussion about what we're doing with Public Works in particular. And I'm really hoping we do that very quickly after the first of the year, so that if we can come to some more comfortable strategies, we can move on them. But there's a lot of things up in the air when it comes to Public Works that, honestly, I feel like the can's been kicked down the road a long time without having these discussions. And, you know, just as one point, my very first conversation with anyone that worked in the city was in 2017, where the director of Public Works at that time assured me that all the development in Duval, all of it, including annexations, could be taken care of by the third bay. And I don't think that's what we think now. So, you know, there's a lot around Public Works that we really need to understand. So we're absolutely confident in our investments, whether that's be staff or CIP or replacements for systems and trams and all of those things. We really, and Public Works deserves our attention as well.
So to make sure I understand, it's not just we're talking about FD positions here in proposed new positions proposed in the budget, but when it comes to the CIP, Councilmember Lango, you would support at some point either paring down the number of projects so it fits our staff, or looking at hiring another FTE engineer position to help support these projects.
I think we could end up in that situation. I'm not convinced that we are analyzing how we use our CIP funds. And I'm not talking about the projects. I mean, it's pretty hard to say you don't need those projects. But what is a question is, are we funding Public Works in the capital area in a way that all those projects can ultimately be done in a time frame that is you know, commensurate with the needs of the city? And, you know, based on so many years experience, we have a real serious conversation to have around Public Works and project management. And yes, as you described it, either we scale back our projects, change the timeline, or deal with the staffing issue, because the current staffing level will not sustain those projects. I will bet everything I've got on it.
Well, good, thank you. I think I was next on that list. I fully support the admin support position. I think our admin has scrambled a great deal. Many of our departments have, but I think especially there. And I certainly support the first year contract city administrator followed by a full-time. I think that's just something we need to help guide the city, help manage. You know, we're awfully large in terms of number of departments and personnel, and even with HR issues. It's really tough for me with the Public Works because I see a need for all those positions. It's hard when you're not the boss doing the job and right there. I wish I had the crystal ball. I feel pretty comfortable when I do think agree with Councilmember Naplin that the margins look a little bit tight, but they're still there. There's still some breathing room, I think. I know that as our city grows, we add parks, we add, you know, every house that goes in, there's additional water and sewer. And so I don't have any doubt that we need the positions, but that question that I've often asked council to ask themselves, is it sustainable? And that one is always tough. There's a little crystal ball because we don't know what the future brings, but you just want to make sure that those lines that you watch for revenue and expenditures and employee costs, that we're able to bring in the kind of revenues we need to help fund those. I would love to start making some inroads there. And then, you know, I agree that it would be nice to have the studies done, both on workload analysis as well as looking at at Water and Sewer to have more information. But I think there's more than enough work over there to start with one or two of the employees, and then we can come back and take a look, especially potentially with the parks position, to come back and say, hey, you know, I mean, we're not really out mowing lawns, although I realize the Big Rock Ballpark needs regular maintenance. They're out there every single week being able to do work up there. So it's not like there isn't enough work in parks, but I think being able to look at that a little bit more information and making a decision, you know, in the next 6 months or so might be helpful. So I will go on to Councilmember Brunicki. You've said yes to these positions. Is there anything you would like to add?
So in regards to the positions, administrator, 10 years ago, I said yes to that. Admin to assist, I think that was like something 4 years ago, I was agreeable to that. One of the positions at Public Works has been asked for probably 10 years. I think now is a good time for that. And for the other two, looking at the growth and looking at how we as a city have grown, I'm still on board for those as well. So that's my yes.
I appreciate your clarity. Councilmember Hoag, where do you stand on these positions?
So I'm good with the admin support, the city administrator, of course, we've needed that. I think doing a phased in approach for other positions would be smart, but I mean, I know that the council had actually wanted to not see new FTEs coming in throughout the biennium. We wanted to see them all during the budget process, but to imagine having them all start on January 1 is a bit overwhelming. And I think that we really need to look at the sustainability. I looked at some numbers today, going back 5 years and then going ahead to 2020. And it's kind of astounding to see how much the salaries and benefits have gone up. They went up in 5 years, they went up 1.4 million. In 7 years, they went up 2 million. We got to have someone help us look at these numbers. I don't know how that's sustainable, whether we need the positions. I'm not debating whether we need them. We probably need them, but maybe we need to figure out if we can afford them and how we're going to be sustainable into the future. I don't know the answers. I just feel like we need somebody to help us guide us through that.
Thank you. I think that really is helpful. I've heard that from several council members in our discussions here. We have talked about having a financial advisor be able to come in and look at those things. Are we sustainable? That's a big question. You take a look at our planned revenues and see what our cost projections are and see if those are lining up. So I think that's a helpful question. Councilmember McHenry.
Well, I definitely support all the positions, but I'm very open and willing to talk about a phased in approach. I don't think that's a bad idea at all. So to have that conversation and see what that would look like or different scenarios could be really helpful to get everyone there on the budget.
Thank you. So just to recap, making sure there are some concerns about the FTE positions for the water, the parks, and the sewer. Some of that just is about sustainability. Some of that is just being able to get that work analysis. I think Director Laniszewski has provided a lot of information for us, but certainly some of those larger studies would help. It sounds like there is complete support for the FTE admin position and for the contract city administrator position, turning into a full-time position in the second year. Does council agree we can pull those last two off the table then? In other words, they're in the budget. We're ready to fund those two positions in this two-year budget. Input from council? I see a lot of nods. And anybody feel like those two positions for admin and city administrator should not be in? Okay, so I think we can take those off our list. This was my goal, is to help narrow it. I apologize if it doesn't seem like, you know, that this is a little unusual, but I'm trying to narrow us down so that we can really focus on the key things we need to move forward. So there's been some different ideas here with the FTE positions for water, parks, and sewer. I've heard phased in approach. I've heard let's hold off until we get some of the studies done and information coming forward, and some support for all three positions. I think, again, Steve's done a really good job of helping to provide us with additional information on those. I'm trying to figure out what's the best way to move forward. One of the questions I've had is council comfortable with one of those positions and saying, yes, you know, Steve can decide which one, or two positions? You know, I mean, how far are we willing to go here? I think there's been some voice that we don't want to make the decision which one's the top priority. You know, we see that there's a lot of work to get done, and then we can discuss what kind of information we need. I think Steve asked that last time, what do we need from him? And no one seemed to have specifics yet, other than maybe getting that study done to really take a look at workload and you know, some of that long-term financial picture. Are they sustainable? So with council, so here's kind of a follow-up on this. I'll just go through each person again. How many are you comfortable with adding one or two of the positions before we add a third? I'm just trying to get a sense of how far, you know, we're willing to go to cover those requested positions to meet the needs. Again, I'll start with Councilmember Naplin.
I think starting with one is a reasonable compromise. So, and like I said, I don't know which position is the most needed. That's, you know, something I think Director Laniszewski could share. I think, you know, I know that what's wanted is a dedicated position. And if perhaps a position, you know, a secondary position couldn't be added until another year goes by, you know, perhaps there could be a little bit of a shift of allocations in the meantime, so that an existing staff member could, you know, we could have, you know, they'd be potentially a little heavier on, you know, if we hired a sewer person, then, you know, maybe there'd be some shift slightly on some of the positions to do a little more water work to balance that out. That would be my just kind of brainstorm on that. But I definitely would not feel comfortable hiring more than just one to start.
So you support one. Sometimes I lose track of who I had where. Councilmember Lingle.
Well, I would be fine with one. I think there's some revenue numbers that, because we're on a cash basis, you know, there's still a few revenue numbers, not just sales tax, but you know, we have some COVID money that still has to come in, and hopefully that'll be at full amount. You know, we know our sales tax money that's been coming in is at a very high point. Now, true, that's one time. You have to remember that. We also have the, as I said, the Christmas bonus possibly in sales tax. So I would be open to looking at a second position pending taking a look at those studies that Councilmember Naplin is referring to, but it wouldn't be to start the year. It would be something maybe we would look at in the middle of the year, or, you know, possibly getting information on that even sooner. You know, starting at maybe the quarterly report time when we have a firm idea where we really ended up in 2020. So, you know, I'm open to some flexibility on the second one, but I wouldn't put it in the base budget.
Okay.
It's one of those things where I'd be open to reserving some funds to it, but we got to get some other information in here to get everybody comfortable.
Good, thank you. Well, again, I think I was probably number 3 on there. I could support 2 of those positions from the numbers I've seen, folks I've talked to in the department. in general, in tight budget years, I think I've mentioned this to some before, usually parks, when budgets are doing well, people love their parks, trails, and open space, but when things are tighter, that usually is one area that, that we pause on because it's really such a nice to have, and some might say it's absolutely critical. We have such beautiful parks and want to maintain them, but if there was one position I'd say we could wait and try to get that additional information, that would be the position that I would look at. Councilmember Hoag.
So I would be in favor of one position now or in January, and then before we consider a second one or a third one, it'd be good to see those, the workload analysis and maybe a sustainability analysis. I don't know what, prior to making any further decisions.
Thank you. Let's see, Councilmember Brudnicki.
I guess I would have a question for Steve before I could answer that question, is that sometimes with public services and things such as like parks, theaters that the city owns, those types of things, I guess my question is, because I don't want to manage your department, Steve, but trying to make a decision to decide who you're going to have and what you're going to hire is really out of my wheelhouse. So I suppose if you didn't have the parks person, a way to mitigate the fact that you don't have enough help for that is, would we do what other cities do? Would we limit park hours, cut hours down, close it down maybe? I just need to understand that before I say 2, 1, or 3.
Yeah. Steve, I'm going to have you hold off just so we can get through each council member here, and then we'll come back. I think the mayor had some input as well. Councilmember McHenry.
So yeah, this is a tough one. I think, if I was looking to compromise or say, limit the phased in approach, I would be good with 2 right off, but I would want to hear from Director Laniszewski about what his strategy would be if he had 1 versus 2. And then of course 3, he doesn't really need to say because he would have them all, but I would just be interested to hear on like how that would go, what would be prioritized, how that would work. And like Councilmember Brudnicki brought up about what, if any, repercussions would there be from that?
Good. Well, again, just to recap, it sounds like council would support hiring 1, immediately in the budget. And then looking at some type of a phased in approach as we get additional information, we get to monitor how our budget's doing. This is always a tough conversation. So I just want to say thank you to council, first of all. I also want to recognize for directors, there's so much writing on these, and we know that a lot of work went into putting this together. So I appreciate everybody bearing with us as we march through this. Steve, I'd like to call on you next. You've given us a lot of information supporting data. The key questions we have is that sustainability into the future. Another one of the questions is getting some of the additional study information, being able to look at some more data to fully understand where we're at. I know you've provided most of that, but we have talked about doing that workload analysis throughout the entire city, which we haven't completed. And I believe we'd still have to put money aside for that. I don't know that in this budget we've allocated the approximately 30,000 or so it would take to do a full study. So Steve, I'll turn it over to you. You've heard the discussion. We're not asking you to necessarily repeat everything that we've gone through over the last month and a half, but your thoughts on this. It sounds like folks really want to know, how we might parse this out and where the gaps are, because at the end of the day, we make decisions and some of what we decide create gaps or shortfalls.
So I mentioned this to Dot, and I'm not sure how to tee it up, but I didn't ask for 6 knowing we'd negotiate to 3. Like, I put forward the need as we were requested, and I believe we have certainly the workload and the, you know, the math behind it. And I think listening to the conversation, as productive as it may seem, it seems, I don't have I guess I can't understand the concern, because you're talking about numbers and not, again, lines of businesses like I mentioned last week. I mean, you know, for all reasonable purposes, I would say you'd hire the parks, because I take general fund off the table as far as my concerns. And then I come starting next meeting and the meeting after with sewer, and then the meeting, you know, 3 meetings after that with water. And essentially I'm done, as you know, the rates will be explained, the GSCs will be explained, and the workload will be explained relative to those utilities in specific as we have planned. I do agree it's unfortunate timing. We haven't had the, you know, the work being completed on the same schedule. Would have been nice to have been wrapped up 2 months ago. That would have been very easy. So I guess that's the unfortunate side effect, because I don't know what to do, because no one's talking about lines of business, I guess. So again, to be completely transparent and honest, as I have been, I'll take parks, because general fund is the biggest issue normally, but we're not talking about funds or lines of business. So I don't know the concern on why 1 versus 3. So I guess that's my take. I don't think that was helpful, but I'm just trying to be honest. So.
Well, thank you for the feedback on that. I think, as I understand most council members, Steve, the bigger issue is just, you know, there's only so much money in the budget, and you try to prioritize. And again, it's tough for me, because I've looked at each of these, and I think you provided justification. I think Director Mason in finance our finance director had, you know, said that the funds themselves look pretty good. You know, I mean, the fund balance and what we have to work with, you know, that sustainability is always out there. And we do have concerns about, you know, raising rates in the future. And about all I could say, and I know it's hard when you're looking at lines of business and you're trying to manage streets and water and stormwater and wastewater and parks. It's an unbelievable workload. We get that. And in your position, you're dealing with each of those separately. And to try to parse it out is really tough. I get that. Our challenge is there's only so much money in the pot. And we're trying to figure out how much to spend, and how much to make sure we have some cushion and get all the other things done. If it's any consolation, you know, I think folks realize these are important part of our providing service to the citizens. And councils all over have to decide at what level. It was a comment about shutting parks. We keep adding parks without adding employees, and at some point something has to give. So I just want to recognize these are difficult conversations. We all don't have that crystal ball. And so we're just trying to march through this and gain as much understanding and try to do the right things. I know from having been in a position like yours in the fire service, it's really painful when you have those needs and, you know, council says no, or says we're delaying it. That's tough. I understand. And I can't take it away. We're just trying to work through this and look at the entire budget as a whole. So I do appreciate your patience. Mayor,
comments. Sorry, Mike.
Go ahead.
Was it maybe Amy or Diane mentioned, like, what would be the alternatives, right? So for example, I mean, I don't know how, and again, this is a workflow management, but parks alone in the last 7 working days have consumed 264 hours to prepare for Christmas. Am I supposed to tell the mayor I'm not doing Christmas work because I'm only allocated at 90.4 hours a week? So, I mean, I don't want to get draconian in the management of the time, but I think we're going to have to start doing things that we're allocated to do and not trying to compensate and adjust and provide everything we want to provide. So parks are going to take a huge hit. We try really hard to keep up on them, and the guys invest a lot of time, and I assure you 90 hours doesn't cut it. That's right. That's weekly per our budget. So When I asked Joe about Christmas lights, he had the numbers and everything. That's what they are. So, and that doesn't include driving around on Friday night and the parade thing and all the other work. So,
yeah. Councilmember Langle.
I just wanted to make a general comment about the way people are divided up in public works. I think one of the sustainability questions is whether slicing and dicing it really works anymore. And it's incredibly hard to manage those little increments. And I think that's what he's saying there. So putting aside a second, one position, two positions, three, from an organization development standpoint, those little increments lose efficiency because you're always scrambling around to find a person to do something for that gap that exists. And the advantage of, a focused position is there's a lot more accountability. And so that is what line of business would do, in my view, anyway, and in my experience.
Thank you. Mayor, I wanted to call on you, Mayor. You had your hand up. I appreciate your being patient. And we do want to be collaborative here as well. You provided us with the budget and we're trying to understand it and work through it.
Yeah, no problem. So, I definitely understand and share concerns about sustainability long-term, which is why we're doing a government facilities analysis, why we've done the salary analysis, why we're doing a workload analysis, and why we're planning on doing municipal financial planning. I think the challenge that we're facing now with some of these big decisions is a lot of these projects, we thought we could get this all done in 3 years, but things come up and we have not been able to complete all these things. And one of the key principles that you learn when you go through Leadership Eastside is to get comfortable with the uncomfortable and be a leader and make good decisions. And in this case, this is, especially when it comes to staffing, I will say beyond a shadow of a doubt that the public works positions are the most important positions in the city right now. And from my perspective, I would rather not have the city administrator or admin assistant to get public works the folks they need to get our infrastructure, get it on a routine maintenance schedule and stop slicing and dicing employees. I think that's, we've got 2 positions in the budget that were in there last year. And now we're talking about in public works, only giving them one of them for the next biennium right now. And I think that the time that we spent on these issues has been significant. I don't know that any additional reports are going to change anybody's opinions on these things at this point. Because I know that Steve has spent dozens, if not hundreds of hours with folks over the last 2 years discussing these issues. But, if we don't have, we've got reports coming out that even say, under base standards, even adding a new employee, as Mr. Lenishevsky pointed out at the last meeting, doesn't get us to state basic standards. And if we are not maintaining our infrastructure and we don't have the employees to do it, we're constantly going to be slicing and dicing and those efficiencies are going to be gone. We're all uncomfortable. We don't know what the economy is going to hold, but we had the same discussion about just one employee or 2 employees in the last budget cycle. And in that case, everyone was worried that the bottom was going to fall out of the economy. Not only did that not happen, we're in a pandemic and doing better than ever. And part of that is due to luck. Part of that is due to the natural population growth that we have in the city. Part of it is voter approved taxes. Another huge part of it is the extraordinary way the administration has been managing the budgets. When we get to the capital side, to Councilmember Langle's point, we don't have enough staff. We put things on a list. We try and get as much as we can done. But we also recognize that those things roll over into the future. In regards to, creating more emergency funds, that's absolutely in the long-term plan. We just can't achieve everything all at once. And so, to Mr. Lenishevsky's point, we're not asking for all the employees we need or asking for a certain number of employees hoping we get a few. We're asking for what is needed today that we know is sustainable today. Now, at any given time, if the economy drops out, regardless of hiring employees or not, tough decisions will have to be made. I want the city to be in a place where those decisions are, if we get to a place, which every city does at some point in the future, even with financial planning, that if we get to that point, that if we have to lay people off, that at least some of the backup work that we've gotten done is done. Because otherwise our infrastructure will start falling apart. And that's not a good place to be either. And just like streets, if you don't keep up on maintenance on your water, on your parks, etc., it becomes more expensive down the line, and it ends up costing your taxpayers more. So from part of the perspective I'm looking at is, I'd be fine, it sounds like there's agreement to put one in right now. I'd be fine having a set check-in 2 months that says, okay, we're going to look at this. It's in the budget, because we don't want to think, one of the things we want to avoid is amending the budget again and again and again for finance and for council and the community. The goal is to simply do a mid-buy update with your changes, and not having these in the budget makes that process significantly longer as well. So, if council is not comfortable putting these all in the budget now, or having them be able to be filled, Mr. Laniszewski already has a relatively phased approach for phasing these in. His crew can't manage and train 3 new people at once, right? So they're not all coming in at once. None of the positions come in at once. If a budget is approved tonight, we will not even have interviews for, probably not even be able to have applications for new positions out till mid to late December at the earliest. So in that sense, we already are months behind in getting those people on staff, and there's already cost savings for the biennium as you put that in place. I think, we're also in a very unique position compared to other cities, where I was just talking to a mayor today where they're laying off positions, but their council wants to add 4 policy analysts, and they're laying off core employees. We have other people that, other cities that had to make big cuts at the beginning of COVID and are just now starting to claw back. We're in a situation that nobody else has been in, but we also have to remember that we have fewer employees than we had before the 2008 recession. And we have twice as many people and almost twice as much infrastructure. And you can build efficiencies in with technology, which the city has been very proactive at doing. But you always have mandates. You always have additional work that has to be done. You have emergencies, pipes break, etc., that has to be taken care of. And if you don't have the right staffing levels, those other things are never going to be gotten to. And to Mr. Laniszewski's point, this is where we're at with our staffing levels at this point. So from my perspective, honestly, I believe that Public Works needs the FTEs more than City Hall at this point. City Hall is slammed, and there's no doubt about it, but these are very, very important positions. And Public Works, I've known them a long time. They don't ask for anything unless it's needed. They don't ask for extra. They ask for the base level of what they need to get the job done, and often do without at the expense of other things in the city. So, that's the perspective I want to share. But my request would be that if you're not comfortable with these positions now, include them in the budget and write a budget note, because I don't want us to go through the same long process again 3 months down the road, because that does cost a lot of money as well, and will take away from staff's ability to get the day-to-day work done. So I'm thinking about it from that perspective as well, as it's not just a, can we afford and sustainable, it's also operational. And it could hinder operations by having to go through multiple processes for these positions as the years go on.
Well, thank you for helping with perspective. Dina, I wanted to bring you into the conversation. So sustainability, with studies, without studies, there's still this looking at revenue. Last time you shared with us that those were separate funds. They can't be used for other things. And you gave us a measure of confidence that those funds were growing, both because of our growth, additional money's coming in. One of the things the studies would provide for us is some assurance that financially we're we're doing some planning for replacing infrastructure, which can be tens of millions over a period of time. And, we're not in that point today, but I would hope we would be smart enough to start that understanding and planning for that replacement of infrastructure, because when it shows up and you've got, $10 million worth of work to do and you haven't planned, you're just borrowing. And so that's the challenge we have. And I just wanted, as finance director, see if you can give us, your opinion really matters here. I know it's not a perfect crystal ball, as I've said, but we'd like to hear from you and just see what your thoughts are on all this.
Well, I'll be honest with you. I'm actually really surprised that there is so much, everyone's looking into the water and sewer position, because those two funds have very healthy fund balances. They have a steady stream of revenue. Population is growing. That revenue is going to grow with the population. There's operating margins in both funds. And even with a smaller than before transfer into the water CIP fund, there's still a really healthy fund balance in the water fund. And, just to repeat what the mayor said, I know Public Works has been really struggling for a long time. So it's tough to hear. It's tough to hear council say, well, let's just pick one position, because they're all really needed. So I understand your concern. I would be more focused, on the general fund positions, because that revenue, it's coming in. It's still coming in strong, but it's I would say it's probably not growing as fast, and it's more uncertain maybe than the utility funds, but the utility funds are really, really strong. So I'm just surprised that instead of saying, that you're more focused on picking one, when they're really they're three separate business units. Each utility is its own little business. So.
Well, thank you. I appreciate your perspective on this. Councilmember Brunicki, and then Councilmember Langle.
So just sitting here listening to this whole thing and seeing throughout the years all the budgets I've worked through, this is one of the healthiest years I've seen. And it is true, we have less people than way back when I first got on council as far as employees go. But one thing, I'm sure you've read in the news many times where cities want to really scrimp and save, and they try to cut back on their sewer or their water, and then they try to do something to save money, and then before you know it, that ends up becoming a really bad decision down the road. And we all pay into the utilities. And I would say when there was a time when Duval Days was not going to happen, and the community got really upset about that. So all these folks volunteered, and people came up to me and said, why didn't you just tell us to pay some money? We want this to happen. And so I thought, I wouldn't, nobody wants taxes or fees or to pay money. That's really strange. But I would guarantee that if you ask anybody in this city, if they want clean water, they want their water to run, they want their sewer to work, they want their parks to be available to them, that I would say a lot of them are going to be on board with, yes, I want those things available, and I want them to work, and I want clean water, and I want the utilities to work. And that's my biggest fear, because I've been around where we've had major pipe work that had to be done. And, Steve can tell you about the times we had to slip line pipes, and when we went in there, what it looked like. And, I think around the city, there's going to be infrastructure issues, and that will come up, that we want to make sure we have the staffing to address those issues, so that, you don't have like a major emergency crisis. So to me, if there's anything I agree with, the idea about workflow, I hired 2 new people, because it doesn't make sense to try to patch things through when you're a business person. You have to have the right people to do the job, to be efficient, to get the job done. You save more money that way. And I would agree with the mayor that if you want to save money, then let's wait on that administrator and admin and let's make sure our pipes work.
Councilmember Langell? I think we're on mute. Yeah, I can't hear you yet.
There you go. Okay.
Here you are.
In Steve's material, he did indicate a phase-in strategy for the second position. Point of clarification, I think we're saying to Steve, if this goes to Councilmember Bernicki's point, if water and sewer are, you know, in a tight position, no. If water and sewer are so critical, which they are, and the utility funds are the healthiest with margin, according to Dana, and I think we can kind of see that it's not as well as we'd like, then I trust that Steve will follow Dana's recommendation and use something in the utility fund. A point that I just want to remind people, something we did before was we approved the mid-year budget amendment where we set aside money for two positions. It was on a reserve basis. And the council or the staff had to come back with agenda bill information before it could be released. And that's how we released money for both the additional accounting support and addressing the building official on an interim basis. So that's just a procedural thing we have done before. I'm not taking a position on it, but it is something you can do. I would add not voting for the budget if we didn't get somebody in there as an administrator. I mean, we should have had it a year ago, quite frankly. There was resources that could have been tapped into, and that conversation didn't happen, and it's past due to have it. So I appreciate the mayor's offer on that, but that's not one I would go for. I would rather have us have more, you know, a plan about the phasing specifically than, and knowing one of the utilities was probably used for the first position. And I think Councilor Bernanke is also correct about parks. We offer a lot of free things that relate to the parks. We don't ask the community for extra for that. It might be because of the park policies, which have put us in a situation with a bunch of small parks to maintain, that we do have to ask the community for a little bit around parks.
Yeah.
So, but we have done a set aside, which is essentially like a mini supplemental budget. And there might be other things we want to treat that way too.
Good, thank you. So Dana, I love coming to you to get answers.
Yeah.
So these are just from me. When we're dealing with the budget, you know, we're required by state law to stay in our budget. We can't go into debt like the federal government. And so we have to live within our budget. So what are the safeguards for us? You know, we don't normally just get into trouble overnight and go, wow, we're, you know, $1 million in the hole. You know, we monitor this regularly. Directors monitor it. The mayor is updated and she monitors it. Certainly finance monitors it. So I want to throw out a hypothetical. If we approved all these positions and the 3 for Steve, and things aren't looking good in the future, margins get too tight, what are our actions that we take as a city, you know, with council to assure we stay on track?
Well, I think we would have to do some budget adjustments during the mid-biennium, you know, a mid-biennium budget adjustment. But one thing that this city has done in the past, and I don't know if council is interested in doing it again this time, is it appropriates the beginning fund balance and all of the revenues as expenditures, which is, you know, I mean, that's basically all the revenue that the city has sitting in the bank, all the revenue that's coming in the biennium. I mean, that's one way of not exceeding your budgeting authority. But I think it would be unlikely, very unlikely for right now. The city is, we're budgeting, if everything comes in as planned, and I feel like we budgeted pretty conservatively, we're budgeting for a 1.1 million fund balance increase overall. So I don't think there's a huge danger in the city exceeding it's the amount of money that it has.
So in simple terms, that's money left over from the current budget cycle that we're
Yes.
carrying
Yes.
forward that we hadn't planned on. But that's
Yes.
also what we term one-time monies, which we don't normally want to expend for employees' ongoing costs. You use one-time monies for one-time items.
Yeah, in general, you do. Of course, there's times when you have a really great year and times when you have a really bad year. And so that's another time when you might want to use some of that fund balance. So you kind of spread it out.
Good. Well, council, I always appreciate the conversation. Sometimes I hear folks and sometimes it changes my mind. And so I just want to loop back around and see if, where folks are at. Has any of this discussion changed where you stand? Or do you have the same concerns and wanting either phasing or holding off? Right now, we've said we're happy to fill one of those positions. So I'll just start as we have before and go through and just see if there's any changes in your thoughts or process here. Councilmember Naplin.
So just listening to the conversation, I think what I'm hearing is related to the approach to add capacity. And that is that we are wanting to add dedicated employees. And that for that reason, an additional FTE is only going to help one thing, I'm hearing. Well, which one do you give it to? This is a problem. Historically, FTEs have been sliced and diced. An extra FTE is 1,500 hours. You can give it to where it's needed the most. And, some here, some there. And I think the approach to try to dedicate employees is a move in the right direction. And my understanding when we added crew leads, that's what we were trying to accomplish, in that, one crew lead would take, a few maintenance workers under their wing and they would focus more on a couple aspects of public works, and the other crew lead would take a couple more and they'd try to get more focused. And the idea was that you wouldn't have people switching gears all day long. And so maybe for a year or two, you kind of slice them like that. I think there's a route to get more dedicated, focused work that doesn't include adding 3 employees all at once. 1,500 hours is what, the working hours out of an FTE is adding 1,500 hours. And it's a large increase. And the only reason we're having this debate is because we are switching with these new FTEs to make them 100% dedicated FTEs. And that's a new thing. And so I think that's why the conversation is difficult, because it feels like we have to choose which line of business these extra hours will be dedicated to. And so I just wanted to throw out there, I still haven't changed my mind. I think an additional FTE is going from 7 to 8, what's 15% increase in working hours available to accomplish tasks. That's a lot. So, and then to be able to analyze and add another one in a year, I think it's reasonable. So I haven't changed my mind.
Oh, that's fine. Thank you. Councilmember Langle. I think I still have you on mute. Sorry.
I should probably always be on mute. I think, I don't care what, I'll defer to whatever Steve wants for whatever position. I talked about the thin margin on the general fund, so I can't debate that I haven't been concerned about that. I think a possible compromise I would feel comfortable with is doing a set aside to start a second position in this coming year. And it would have to be a utility position. It couldn't be, it would have to be a utility position, because that's where Dana says we're the strongest. And actually using that at her point, and even though I worry about the general fund, the money coming in is going into the general fund if there's extra. And if we are to ask the citizens to be more involved, whether it's, Christmas lights or whatever, I think they can at least participate in parks. They can't participate in utilities. So I guess I'm saying that it would be a utility position if there was going to be a second position. And I would say the best way to handle that is to do what we did with the other positions, which is to say we would set aside funds, they would not be released. And, we'd get some additional information while Steve is, doing his first hire. And then we can reject, delay, whatever. We would have that opportunity without getting ourselves. I suppose it's asking for both worlds, right? We're asking for a breathing space and a mechanism to do that. And I guess I would go that far with a second position. I'm not going to, I think the third position is just too much to absorb that fast without some of this information, that all these studies that keep floating around that we don't have. So that's kind of where you were, I think, Mayor Pro Tem at the beginning, but not quite.
Is that the lead in for me? I
Sure
think
it
I
is.
was probably comfortable with two positions, and holding off so we could really get some additional information as well. And so I'll leave it at that and move it over to Councilmember Hogue.
So my position didn't change much, but just hearing from everyone, it seems like we kind of have some things in common of what we're looking for, and that the mayor mentioned wanting to maybe have some funds in the budget. We have a footnote in the budget that, what we're going to do to accomplish. I'd like to see the studies, and I'd like to be real specific about what we'd like for the next position to be hired. And I thought I heard that Steve was planning a phased approach anyway. So maybe this is all, something we can come to terms on is my only thought.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Councilmember Bernicki. You've been really straightforward. You'd support all three. So
Yes, after hearing Steve and our finance director explain things, I'm very set on three. That's my position.
Thank you. Councilmember McHenry.
So I still support three, but like I said, I'm willing to talk about that. And I definitely hear everyone's concerns. I think I would err more toward two, like you. I was looking at that chart that Steve sent about the implementation, or I think it was him that sent that. So I was looking at how I think they would start advertising, recruiting, and interviewing right away come January, or maybe even end of December. I'm not sure, but looked like the water FTE would come on first and then the parks and sewer at the same time. So I guess my only follow-up question that I was hoping Steve could answer was something like what Councilmember Naplin said about, if you only got one or two, would you still dedicate them? Would you slice up work? What would you do with that?
Steve, you can jump in.
Well, I still lead to the simplest approach for today is the parks worker. Again, when there's no differentiation on the line of business, I'll take the hardest one to get because it's the general fund, right? How easy is it to get anything out of the general fund? It's not. So I'm still, I don't want to say confused on the topic of FTEs at hand, but yeah, I'll take parks. And then I think we have the topic coming up very swiftly on sewer for CAP / the analysis for financial analysis, and then water is right behind it. The water worker is certainly second because it puts, again, because I still have the FTE that I'm hopeful will switch. And again, diverting the lines of business to getting dedicated parks workers is, I think, paramount for our crew's, success. And I would work with the union to convert the vacancy into a parks worker. That's still top priority. We have a ton of parks. We have a ton of generalized maintenance that takes, significant effort. And when you can't dedicate the time to it, and you scatter him and haw and get to it when you can, it looks like you got to it when you can't. So I've had plenty of complaints from folks, on this video here on, how we do or don't do things appropriately. And, variety and change is tough to manage that. So that's kind of how it would go down. And water would go down on the little table, which I can share. I have it pulled up.
Mhm. Well, we're
hoping it's an internal recruitment, right?
We're down to about 9 minutes. So Steve, if you can kind of just refresh us on this real quick.
Yeah, so the water would be simplest because, again, we're hoping it's a dedicated worker who would take a position in-house. And then parks, again, because I said it's typically, being honest and straightforward as I have the whole time, it's hardest to get a worker out of the general fund. So I'll take the worker out of the general fund. The utilities will show the finances, and I'm confident that will prevail. I have you guys want to wait 3 months and you see the numbers and you believe them, then we wait 3 months and this conversation's, over, in my opinion. So have a third-party financial consultant who's going to show you the math, and you're going to be completely content with it. So I'm not worried about it.
I love that positivity, Steve.
It's just simple math, and I don't have the emotion in it. It's just, it's easy for me.
Is that the engineer side?
Pretty typical. I'm a green, right?
Oh, I love it. I love the straightforward. I appreciate that from you. So it sounds like we're split a little bit between 1 and 2, but certainly we have one position. Steve said that would be parks. We pretty much wanted to leave it up to him. So it sounds like the parks position is in the budget right now. We're looking at potentially phased approach for at least one more position, if not 2. I guess we'll wait and see what the information says. And now the mayor has suggested that we put them in the budget, but not fund them.
No.
So that they're in there.
No.
Clarification.
No, go ahead,
Clarification. My recommendation is to leave them in the budget with a budget note that says when those positions come forward, council will evaluate the releasing. It's not the ideal way to do it, but it's a lot better to have them in the budget and not fill them at a later date than to not have them in the budget and then scramble later on and have to do more budget work. I'm thinking not just of the timing factor, but also the staff work necessary to bring these things forward to council multiple times.
Okay. So Dana, help me with the budget note. Budget note, some have said, nope, that's rock solid. And others said, well, it's a little squishy. Sometimes I've heard a budget hold, that we've frozen the position, so that it's in there, but it's frozen. And the only way it gets unfrozen is council's approval. So what is the most solid way, if we were to put these in the budget, what's the solid way to make sure that, I know that sounds like a trust thing, but I'm falling on a sword, I guess. Does it make sense what I'm asking about?
It makes sense. So I'm not familiar with budget notes from my former place of work, but I have seen the budget notes at this city, so we could do them as it's usually an attachment or exhibit to the budget, right? And so far, it seems like this is the first one we have, the first note.
So what's your experience? Is there a better way to do it?
There were no, the budget process at Woodinville was very different. It was a little more, not quite as in depth. I'm not saying that's better or worse or anything, but it just was a little bit, like all council got was the budget book, not the line item detail. So it's just a different process. It's what you're used to and what they're used to. So.
Well, council, we have 5 minutes before city council starts. I want to ask just quickly, we're looking at having another meeting next Tuesday, starting at 5:30. That would be a roughly 3-hour meeting. It would just simply be for budget. It would allow us to wrap up here on FTEs. Just make sure we're all on the same page. It would allow us to talk about the CIP and hit some of the other loose ends that we have. So I'm just looking for a show of hands. How many are good with a special council meeting workshop on the budget next Tuesday? It looks like the majority. So we'll move forward. I think that I had some discussions with staff today. So I think that Jody, you're set to go with that. Okay, well with that and no other business, we'll be adjourned and we'll see you at City Council meeting in a few minutes. Thank you, everybody.